Hi everyone, Rick Russell here. Stand by for channel markers. The late 40s had not gone well for the Navy, at least in Washington. By January 1950, the admirals were still on the ropes, gloves up, fending off more budget cuts and fighting against the effort of the other services to define the Navy's existence. That month, the Joint Chiefs of Staff authorized the Navy to operate a maximum of 6 fleet carriers, which meant reducing the existing force even further. The new Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Forrest Sherman, WASP's commanding officer when she was sunk in 1942, successfully argued for keeping a 7th carrier so the Navy could have, he said, 1 carrier active in the Western Pacific and Southeast Asia. Sherman's foresight paid off. Less than 6 months later, in June 1950, when North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel, completely surprising South Korea and the United States, the Essex-class carrier USS Valley Forge, CV-45, was in Hong Kong and responded immediately. After President Truman decided South Korea should be defended, the carrier began launching airstrikes against the invaders, sending Navy jets into combat for the first time starting July 3rd. The Navy was back, even vindicated it seemed, despite crippling financial problems and the relentless threat to naval aviation from the Air Force. The Navy had never swerved from the strongest argument favoring its carriers, which was this: their mobility allowed them to supply both offensive and defensive tactical air power early in a conflict when the U.S. suffered from a lack of air bases abroad. Day after day for 3 years, Valley Forge and her sister ships drove that point home, unloading tens of thousands of tons of bombs and rockets on enemy targets. Although the Navy had played a decisive role in projecting American power across both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans during World War II, the advent of nuclear weapons fundamentally altered the calculus of military power. Not to belabor a point we've made elsewhere, but in 1949, the Truman administration was on the verge of putting all its Defense Department eggs in the Air Force's basket. That is, until the Soviet Union exploded an atomic device in August 1949, ending the U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons. The shock of such an event, coming about a decade earlier than expected, led to a special National Security Council study known as NSC 68. Its authors endorsed the Navy's strategic approach and recommended the United States abandon a nuclear-only strategy and prepare itself to fight a major conventional war for planning purposes by 1954. The study was still under discussion when the Korean War started. Not all the challenges the U.S. Navy had to overcome after World War II were political. In a century defined by rapid technological change, especially for navies, changes for the period between the end of the war against Japan in 1945 and the start of the Korean War almost 5 years later came astonishingly fast. Aircraft had needed only 40 years to evolve from what amounted to a powered kite in 1903 to the Navy's wartime Corsairs and Hellcats, with jets arriving to push the sound barrier only several years later. Jets promised to revolutionize naval aviation. The Navy was reshaping its force around them. When Valley Forge went into action, her air group was transitional. It consisted of 2 fighter squadrons with 30 F9F Panther jets, 2 fighter squadrons with 28 F4U-4 Corsairs, and an attack squadron with 14 AD-4 Skyraiders. Panthers and Skyraiders, flying from the Valley Forge, made their type's combat debuts during the attacks of July 3rd. The carrier also carried 14 other aircraft for reconnaissance, anti-submarine warfare, and early warning, making a robust complement of 86 total aircraft. By 1950, adapting jets, which included the Atlantic Fleet's more common F-2H-2 Banshees, to carrier operations was then and remained an extremely dangerous and difficult proposition well into the 1980s. Almost everything about them was different from prop planes. Flight deck and air operation procedures all needed to be changed. Over time, this meant investing in new nylon crash barriers, improved arresting gear, reinforced flight decks, more powerful catapults, and eventually such major innovations as the angled deck. For example, the old World War II wire crash barrier, which could capture and stop a plane without damaging the aircraft, didn't work with jets. Unlike a landing prop plane, which cut power to the engine, stalling the aircraft. A jet's higher landing speed meant that, in case of a bad landing, the aircraft might hop the barriers and crash into parked aircraft and service crews forward, causing predictably catastrophic outcomes. After several notable incidents, by 1950, the Navy had begun installing a third barrier, a nylon barricade, as it was called, forward of the first two. A jet would poke its nose through the barricade's vertical straps, which would catch the wings with minimal damage. Valley Forge didn't have her barricade installed until she made a pit stop at a Japanese shipyard between her first and second Korean War deployments. Fortunately, when she went into action in June 1950, she also had the Navy's most experienced jet pilots on board. Also, catapults suddenly mattered. Jets couldn't take off without them. World War II carriers, including the pre-war flat tops, had catapults in case battle damage impaired use of the entire flight deck, but they rarely used them. Carriers simply turned into the wind and made enough speed to create 30 to 35 knots across the flight deck, which was sufficient for a fully gassed and armed propeller plane to take off under its own power. With the deck launch, a prop plane could go into the air every 10 seconds. Not jets. They accelerated much more slowly and could not achieve flying speed without the additional push supplied by a catapult. If the catapult crews and pilots were experienced, then a carrier could launch a jet every 30 seconds. Keeping catapults working flawlessly was essential, but cross-decking, that is the deliberate transferring of experienced crew for recommissioning ships, particularly as the jet-capable carrier force increased to 19 decks in 3 years, spread the petty officer ranks dangerously thin. Catapult malfunctions, such as a cold cat shot, in which a plane was launched prematurely before its engine was fully warmed up, was almost always fatal for the pilot. On her way to Korea, Valley Forge steamed through the Taiwan Strait, sending 29 Corsairs and Skyraiders roaring ahead as a show of force to deter Chinese communists from attacking Taiwan. She stopped at Okinawa on 30 June, linked up with the British carrier Triumph, sailed to Korea overnight on 1 to 2 July, and attacked the next day. Waves of Corsairs and Skyraiders struck the North Korean airfield at Pyongyang while Panthers flew top cover. Tons of bombs from the attacking Navy planes pounded hangars, fuel storage facilities, parked Soviet-built aircraft, and railroad yards. The escorting Panthers shot down 2 Yak-9 prop planes and damaged another. Nonetheless, on the ground, the embattled and outnumbered Allied troops fought desperately, but eventually gave way. The invaders soon overran all land bases on the peninsula, and only aircraft carriers could supply the tactical aircraft needed to support their surviving U.S. and South Korean ground forces. Philippine Sea arrived in early August, followed by Leyte and Boxer later that same month, taking some of the pressure off Valley Forge's Carrier Air Group 5. By 19 November 1950, sorties flown from Valley Forge alone numbered more than 5,000, with 2,000 tons of bombs and rockets delivered. Happy Valley, as they called her, made 4 combat tours in Korea. The Korean War conclusively refuted the Air Force's narrow focus on nuclear weapons by demonstrating the need for substantial modern conventional armed forces. It had 3 major effects on the U.S. Navy. First, the size of the active fleet was dramatically increased. The Iowa-class battleships and many famous carriers returned to service. Second, the case for the aircraft carrier in the Cold War had been unquestionably proved. The first 2 Forrestal-class supercarriers were ordered during the war. The Navy ordered 7 more supercarriers from 1954 to 1964. Third, the nation embarked upon a major program of warship construction that appropriately included 18 Forrest Sherman-class destroyers. That's all for this channel marker. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment or recommend another subject below. As always, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.